Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber stance throughout Kenobi functions as an observable index of his cognitive and emotional state. Unlike his presentations in prior canonical sources, where Sorosu form maintains consistent structure, balance, and readiness, his posture in the series exhibits measurable deviations. These deviations correlate with reduced confidence, disrupted identity continuity, and persistent guilt associated with the outcome of his final engagement with Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith. The stance alterations are not stylistic revisions but intentional, physical indicators of degraded internal stability. At the beginning of the series, Obi-Wan avoids engaging with the Force and refrains from utilizing Jedi combat discipline. This avoidance produces a posture marked by defensive minimization. The saber is held low and close to the torso, rather than angled upward at a traditional 45-degree elevation, typical of Sorosu practitioners. His feet remain narrowly spaced rather than forming the wider triangular foundation visible in his Clone Wars and Episode The Fiends Athena movements. These structural shifts demonstrate a combatant prioritizing self-protection over strategic anticipation. When Kenobi initially engages hostile forces on Mapuzo, his movements further illustrate compromised form integrity. He exhibits delayed guard transitions, reduced hip rotation, and inconsistent weight distribution. His blade does not create the standard circular, defensive arcs characteristic of Sorosu. Instead, he performs short, reactive parries that mechanically align with fighters experiencing cognitive overload, indicating that his motor planning is impeded by internal interference. The reduced extension of his lead arm is particularly significant. In traditional Sorosu, Obi-Wan projects his weapon forward to maximize coverage and redirect incoming strikes. In Kenobi, he retracts the weapon toward his body, reducing reach and eliminating early engagement options. This modification suggests a practitioner who does not trust his ability to control space and defaults to restrictive motion patterns. His footwork contains similar indicators. Rather than executing multi-directional microsteps that maintain 360-degree defensive readiness, Obi-Wan exhibits linear retreating steps and occasional stationary hesitation. These traits correspond to combatants with conflict-avoidant behavioral patterns, revealing that the mechanical deficits reflect psychological factors rather than physical decline alone. Body language during mid-fight pauses reinforces this interpretation. In duels from earlier periods, Obi-Wan holds his shoulders level, chin oriented toward his opponent, and spine lengthened. In Kenobi, his shoulders drop, head tilts downward, and stance compresses. These are recognized markers of reduced assertiveness and visually signify a practitioner who perceives himself as unprepared for confrontation, consistent with his narrative isolation, and self-imposed withdrawal. As the narrative progresses, evidence of gradual rehabilitation appears. During interactions with Leia, and during attempts to reconnect with the Force, Obi-Wan begins to demonstrate partial restoration of traditional form mechanics. This includes improved blade orientation, increased angular rotation, and reintroduction of anticipatory stance positioning. Although incomplete, these shifts indicate the early stages of cognitive recalibration. Training sequences in later episodes show incremental changes in kinetic confidence. His shoulders align more evenly, his foot spacing widens, and blade readiness angles increase. These improvements closely map onto psychological models in which self-forgiveness and self-efficacy increase after exposure to corrective experiences. The return of technical precision reflects a corresponding restoration of internal stability. By the time Kenobi confronts Vader in the final episodes, his stance exhibits a hybrid structure, partially restored Sorosu alignment mixed with residual defensive constriction. Early in the duel, Obi-Wan maintains a cautious guard. His blade hovers near the midline, and foot movements remain conservative. This indicates a practitioner who has regained partial technical proficiency, but continues to experience unresolved internal conflict. A pivotal change occurs during the sequence in which Obi-Wan recognizes that Anakin's actions were autonomous rather than a direct consequence of his own failure. The cognitive shift correlates with immediate adjustments in posture. The saber rises to its classical high guard position. His lead hand extends outward, re-establishing spatial control. His stance widens to a triangular configuration, restoring ground stability. Simultaneously, Kenobi begins executing characteristic Sora-Su rotations, including full-body pivots, circular blade parries, and deflection-based redirections. Such mechanics require confidence in timing and spatial judgment. Their reappearance demonstrates that he has regained trust in his own competency. The physical form becomes an external confirmation of underlying psychological reconstruction. His offensive transitions also display measurable change. Whereas earlier engagements show limited strike commitment, the final duel includes wide, arcing cuts powered by lower body torque. This indicates a return to integrated kinetic sequencing, a hallmark of a combatant free from inhibitory self-doubt. His renewed capacity for controlled offense signifies full re-entry into the identity of a Jedi Knight. Energy output in force-assisted actions provides additional support. Early telekinetic movements appear strained and inconsistent. In the final confrontation, Obi-Wan demonstrates large-scale, coordinated force application, including high-mass object manipulation. The stance accompanying these actions is stable, upright, and aligned, reflecting restored psychological coherence. Obi-Wan's closing posture, after the UI Spite Timao, dual, upright spine, squared shoulders, and balanced footwork, matches pre-Revenge of the Sith posture, more closely than any moment earlier in the series. This suggests that self-forgiveness is not simply thematic, but an observable variable with mechanical correlates. His stance functions as an external record of identity integration returning to baseline. The final scenes reinforce this analysis. Obi-Wan's stance when interacting with Luke is relaxed, stable, and structurally open. The saber is held casually but with technical correctness. His physical bearing indicates a practitioner no longer constrained by guilt-based inhibition. The body language conveys internal alignment without reliance on dramatic cues. Taken together, Obi-Wan's evolving lightsaber stances across Kenobi form a coherent dataset linking physical mechanics to psychological transformation. Changes in blade orientation, footwork, guard height, and posture consistently reflect shifts in self-perception, guilt resolution, and identity recovery. His final restored form represents the culmination of a cognitive and emotional process in which self-forgiveness enables reactivation of dormant skill sets. His posture operates as a quantifiable indicator of internal stabilization and renewed operational readiness. Obi-Wan's final transformation in Kenobi is not defined by a change in power level, but by a recalibration of identity. Once he accepts that Anakin's fall was not his failure to prevent, his physicality shifts from defensive collapse to integrated mastery. This evolution becomes most apparent in his stance, an embodied expression of psychological acceptance, realigned purpose, and restored connection to the Force. It is not simply better form, it is a structural indicator of a man who has reconstituted his sense of self. Early in the final duel, his movements display lingering remnants of trauma. His blade orientation is functional but closed, his strikes cautious, his steps reactive. These are not the traits of a Jedi in full command. They represent a practitioner still influenced by fear of repeating past mistakes. His shoulders remain slightly compressed, signaling hesitation, and his guard retains traces of the inward collapse that characterized the first half of the series. He is fighting competently, but not freely. The turning point begins when the duel shifts from external confrontation to internal reckoning. Once Obi-Wan begins recalling the relationships that defined him, his bond with Leia, his promise to safeguard the twins, and his lingering belief in the goodness that once existed in Anakin, his stance subtly shifts. His weight settles into the ground rather than retreating from it. His spine lengthens. His saber arcs grow wider. The fight becomes less a physical test and more a psychological reawakening. The change in posture marks the moment he stops fighting for survival and begins fighting for clarity. When he finally confronts the truth, that Anakin's descent into Darth Vader was a product of Anakin's own choices, the transformation becomes unmistakable. The iconic Sora-Su high guard returns with perfect structural execution. This guard, marked by an elevated blade and extended leading hand, operates not only as a defensive formation, but as a doctrinal signature. It signals mastery, control, and readiness to absorb and redirect force with minimal exertion. Its reappearance demonstrates that Obi-Wan has not merely recovered skill, he has recovered identity. In this restored stance, Obi-Wan's footwork shifts from linear to radial. Instead of backing away, he begins circling, establishing command over space rather than yielding it. His pivots realign around a central axis that is both physical and thematic, a stable internal center he has regained through self-forgiveness. Each movement communicates emotional equilibrium. The rigid hesitation that once defined him dissolves into fluidity. His strikes come from full body alignment, a sign that his consciousness is no longer divided between guilt and necessity. Energy expenditure decreases even as combat effectiveness rises. This is a hallmark of Jedi efficiency, maximum output from minimal motion. Obi-Wan transitions into strikes fueled by coordinated breath, hip, rotation and stabilized core engagement. These kinetics are not possible under psychological fragmentation. They require full integration of mind, body and purpose. His restored posture allows his force connection to manifest not as strained effort, but as seamless extension of his intent. His newfound strength becomes most visible in his telekinetic surge, the moment he lifts an entire wall of stones. This feat is not purely about power, it is about alignment. Throughout earlier episodes, his telekinetic attempts were inconsistent and laboured, reflecting disrupted internal channels. In contrast, the final sequence shows activation of high-level force projection governed by calm certainty. His stance during this act is grounded, symmetrical, and open-chested, revealing a practitioner no longer constrained by self-doubt. The force flows because the blockage, guilt, is gone. The emotional resolution becomes explicit when Vader's mask breaks and Anakin's face becomes partially revealed. Obi-Wan's stance, rather than collapsing into regret, remains upright. His saber lowers with controlled deliberation, instead of trembling. His shoulders soften without sagging. This composure demonstrates that self-forgiveness has given him the stability to face Anakin, not as a failure, but as a fact. His posture at this moment shows both sorrow and serenity. Where earlier episodes displayed avoidance, here he maintains open alignment, indicating acceptance without self-condemnation. In the fight's closing movements, Obi-Wan reverts fully to his pre-war elegance. The long, sweeping defensive arcs characteristic of advanced Sorisu reappear with precision. His weight shifts with confidence, distributing evenly along the lateral plane instead of recoiling backward. The tension that once governed his breathing dissipates. Even when he chooses disengagement, the act is deliberate rather than fearful. His final posture before leaving Vader on the ground, upright, steady, resolved, embodies a reconciled practitioner who now understands that mercy and clarity, not guilt and self-punishment, define a Jedi. The concluding scenes of the series further demonstrate this restoration. Obi-Wan's posture when interacting with Luke is relaxed, yet precise. His gait is balanced, his shoulders rest in a neutral alignment. When he carries his saber, it is no longer clutched as a burden, but held with effortless familiarity. His stance in these scenes echoes his posture from The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, a man confident in his place within the Force. This visual continuity confirms that the series has completed its emotional thesis. Forgiveness stabilizes form. Ultimately, Obi-Wan's lightsaber stance across Kenobi serves as a physical chronicle of emotional healing. The technical restoration of Sorisu, the widening of footwork, the return of upward guard positions, and the regained fluidity in blade work all correspond to psychological reintegration. His stance ceases to be a defensive shell and becomes once again an expression of purpose, insight, and peace. Acceptance does not merely strengthen Obi-Wan, it restores the entire architecture of his identity.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.